Isaiah Calloway was 38 years old, a logistics operations director who had spent 12 years making sure that the things people needed arrived at the places they needed to be on the day they were promised without incident. He drove a dark blue work van he used on weekend renovation projects. He wore steel-toed boots to the office on Fridays, because Fridays he went straight from the office to whatever job he was finishing. He kept his phone in his left breast pocket, not his back pocket, because he'd learned early that the back pocket was where phones went to get sat on and cracked, and a cracked screen was the difference between seeing something clearly and not seeing it at all. The morning his wife Denise's attorney looked across a conference table at Isaiah and said, with the flat, professional confidence of a man who had delivered this sentence many times, "Mr. Calloway, let's be direct. You have nothing." Isaiah looked at him for a moment. Then he smiled. Then he took the phone out of his left breast pocket and set it on the table face up. The attorney stopped talking. What was on that phone was 11 months of work. She had no idea he'd been building it since the day she filed. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The warehouse smelled like diesel and cardboard, and the particular cold of a space that was climate-controlled for freight rather than people. Isaiah was at his desk by 6:30, the way he was every morning. Desk in the corner of the operations floor, glass partition, the full warehouse visible from his chair. He liked being able to see it. He liked knowing at a glance whether the sequence was running correctly. Isaiah Calloway had spent 12 years in regional logistics, the last 4 as director of operations for a mid-sized distribution company called Summit Freight Solutions that moved pharmaceutical, medical equipment, and cold chain food products across 11 states. He managed 37 warehouse staff and 11 route supervisors, and a daily throughput of roughly 4,200 individual shipments. He was responsible for the sequence, for making sure that the right thing left the right dock at the right time and arrived where it was supposed to arrive in the condition it was supposed to be in. He was the kind of man who read exception reports before he read his email. He was the kind of man who knew every route, supervisor's name, and their children's names, and the name of the mechanic who serviced the cold chain fleet, because the people in those positions were the ones who kept the sequence running, and the sequence was everything. He drove the dark blue van and wore the steel-toed boots and kept the phone in the left breast pocket. He had been married to Denise for 6 years. He had done the renovation work, the kitchen he'd rebuilt over 3 weekends, the back deck, the finished basement where she'd run her bookkeeping practice because she'd asked him to and because he kept his word, and because he was, above all other things, someone who finished what he started. He had not known when he finished the basement that she had been using it for 16 months to run a second bookkeeping operation that he had never been told existed. He would find out. The way he found out everything, methodically with documentation, and not a single minute before he was ready. The first settlement meeting was at the offices of Hargrove and Pierce on the 9th floor of a building in downtown Atlanta. Neutral colours, long table, the kind of room designed to feel like a level playing field while being anything but. Denise's attorney was a man named Clifton Hargrove, late 50s, silver cufflinks, the careful stillness of a man who had been in enough of these rooms to know that the person who spoke first was usually working from anxiety rather than position. Isaiah had arrived 19 minutes early. He sat with his attorney, a woman named Patricia Wynn, and looked at the table. Patricia had told him before the meeting what Hargrove's likely strategy would be. "He's going to open with an inventory of what Denise is claiming," she had said. "He'll frame the marital estate to favour her, and then he'll make an argument about your disclosed assets that's designed to make you feel like you're negotiating from weakness." Isaiah had said, "Let him." Patricia had looked at him. "You're sure about the sequencing?" He had said, "I need him to say the sentence first." She had understood. She had been his attorney for 4 months, and she was, in the way of very good attorneys, beginning to understand how he thought. Hargrove arrived with Denise at 7 minutes past the hour. Denise sat down across from Isaiah without looking at him directly, not avoidance exactly, but the practiced neutrality of someone who had decided in advance what register to maintain. She had a folder in front of her. She had dressed carefully. She looked, to a person reading the room correctly, like a woman who believed she was sitting inside a situation she already controlled. Hargrove opened the meeting. He outlined Denise's position, the marital residence, the joint savings, the equity in Isaiah's work vehicle fleet. He operated a small side business doing commercial renovation contracts on weekends, vehicles registered under a sole proprietorship, and a list of shared assets accumulated over 6 years. His characterization of the marital estate was accurate on the surface and curated in its framing. The work vehicle equity was valued conservatively. The joint savings were presented as the primary available asset. Then Hargrove paused. He looked at Isaiah with the expression of a man who had delivered a carefully prepared statement and was waiting for the response he expected. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "let's be direct. You have nothing here that changes the basic picture. Your disclosed assets are what they are. Mrs. Calloway's position is strong and well documented, and I think you know that." He finished the sentence the way a man finishes a sentence he has used before and found reliable. Isaiah looked at him. He smiled. It was not a performance. It was the smile of a man who has been waiting for a specific word to be spoken and has just heard it. He reached into his left breast pocket. He took out the phone. He set it on the table, face up. "Give me 1 moment," he said. He opened the screen. He pulled up the first file. He turned the phone so Hargrove could see it and slid it across the table. 11 months before that meeting, on the morning after Denise filed the dissolution petition, Isaiah had driven to the warehouse at 5:45 am and sat in the parking lot for 22 minutes before going inside. He had thought about the sequence. Not the emotional sequence, the operational one. He had treated the situation the way he treated a route failure. Identify the break in the chain, document the scope of the damage, build a recovery plan that could be executed correctly and verified at each step. Feeling came after. Feeling was not useful during. There was a woman named Claudette Osai who managed the cold chain compliance department at Summit, a role that required, above all things, the ability to document temperature deviations, transit exceptions, and regulatory infractions in a way that would hold up to a federal inspection. Claudette was 61 years old, had been doing compliance work for 34 years, and had a mind that stored anomalies the way a good database stored flagged records, accessible, categorized, and ready to surface at the correct moment. She had been Isaiah's colleague for 4 years and his friend, in the quiet way that people who respect each other's precision become friends, for 3. She had called him the morning after the petition was served. "I've been watching something," she said. "I've been watching it for a while. I didn't know if you were ready." He said, "Tell me." She said, "Come by at lunch." He came by at lunch. Claudette had a document folder, not a composition notebook, a labelled manila folder with section tabs, because she was a compliance officer and this was how she organised things, and she opened it on the table in the Summit break room with the particular care of a woman presenting evidence rather than opinion. "I need to start with what I know for certain," she said, "and then show you what I found following it." He said, "Go ahead." The first tab held a printed spreadsheet. It was a client list, 14 small businesses in the Atlanta metro area bookkeeping clients with account codes, service start dates, and monthly billing amounts. Claudette had compiled it over 6 weeks using public business registry filings, professional license records, and 2 phone calls she had made to business owners she knew socially who had mentioned, separately and months apart, that they'd recently switched bookkeeping firms. The name on both referrals was the same. It was not Denise's name. It was the name of a business called Clarity Financial Services. Isaiah looked at the list. Clarity Financial, he said. Incorporated 22 months ago, Claudette said. Single member LLC. She turned to the second tab. The Georgia Business Registry entry. Member name, Denise Calloway. He was quiet. 22 months ago. They had been married for 4 years at that point. The basement renovation had been finished 18 months ago. He thought about the basement. The separate entrance he had installed because she had asked for it. Client privacy, she had said, for her bookkeeping practice. The dedicated phone line. The second monitor. All of it finished on his weekends. All of it, he understood now, for a business she had been running under a different name, billing through a separate entity, keeping entirely outside of any financial record he could see. How much? He said. Claudette turned to the third tab. It was a revenue reconstruction, not a forensic audit, she was careful to say, but a conservative estimate based on the client billing amounts she'd been able to document. 14 clients, average monthly billing calculated from the stated service rates on Clarity's website. Over 22 months. The conservative estimate was $214,000. Isaiah looked at the number. He folded his hands on the table. She built a practice in my basement, he said, with the infrastructure I built. And ran it under a different name. Claudette said nothing. She waited. He thought about the sequence. The separate entrance, the dedicated line. The second monitor he had mounted himself on a Saturday morning, while Denise had been on a client call he had not been able to hear clearly through the door. He picked up his phone. I'm going to need you to help me document this the way you document a compliance failure, he said. Everything in sequence. Everything sourced. Nothing that can be disputed. Claudette said, I've already started. Over the next 4 months, Isaiah and Claudette built the record with the patience of 2 people who understood that the value of documentation was in its completeness, not its speed. He hired Patricia Wynn on the recommendation of a route supervisor whose brother had used her in a business dispute. Patricia brought in a forensic accountant named Darnell Hughes, who spent 6 weeks tracing Clarity Financial Services revenue through the available records. Tax filings, client invoices recovered through a public records process, wire transfer records from the business account Denise had opened at a separate institution. What Darnell found was worse than the conservative estimate. Clarity Financial Services had billed $341,000 over 22 months. The income had been filed under Denise's personal returns, separate from the joint return. It had never been disclosed to Isaiah. It had never appeared in any joint financial record. There was also a second instrument. When Isaiah had financed a commercial renovation project 14 months ago, a small office fit-out he had contracted through his sole proprietorship, the vehicles Hargrove had mentioned at the meeting, he had taken a short-term business credit line to cover materials while waiting for the draw schedule to release. The credit line had been applied for using their joint credit profile. Denise had signed as a co-applicant. The credit line had been for $75,000. $41,000 of it had moved, in 3 transfers, into the Clarity Financial operating account. He had taken the credit line for the renovation. She had redirected part of it to fund her separate business. He had looked at that document for a long time when Darnell placed it on the table. He looked at it the way he looked at a route exception report that showed a $200,000 pharmaceutical shipment diverted to the wrong dock. Not with anger, with the specific, quiet attention of a man reading exactly how and where the sequence had broken. He understood the full picture. He stood over everything. Claudette's folder, Darnell's forensic trace, Patricia's legal analysis, all of it spread across the table in his dining room, and he looked at it together, the way he looked at an operations floor, seeing the whole map of where everything was and where it needed to go. He knew what he had. He put it on his phone. He didn't move fast. That was what she had been counting on. In the 4 months between the petition and the first meeting, Denise had operated on an assumption she had formed over 6 years of watching Isaiah work. He was methodical. He was patient. He was the kind of man who finished things carefully rather than quickly. She had concluded that methodical and patient meant slow to organize, slow to find, slow to understand. She had not understood that methodical and patient was what 12 years of logistics management looked like. It was not slowness, it was sequencing. And Isaiah Calloway could run a sequence. Patricia had told him, 3 weeks before the meeting, what their position looked like when fully documented. He had listened to all of it. Then he had asked one question. What does Hargrove know going in? Patricia had said what Denise told him, which is the disclosed assets, the van fleet, the joint savings, the house. Isaiah had nodded. He's going to open confident. He's going to open very confident, Patricia had said. Good, he had looked at the table. I need him to say the sentence before I open the phone. Patricia had looked at him for a moment. The sentence. The one where he tells me I have nothing. He looked at her. I need him to believe it first, otherwise the room doesn't have the right shape. She had understood then. She had been a lawyer for 19 years, and she understood the architecture of a room and why the sequence of who speaks first matters to what the words actually mean. She had said, "Don't open the phone until he finishes the sentence." He had said, "I know." Denise had called him twice in the weeks before the meeting. He had let both calls go to voicemail. Her first message was practical, routing through their shared calendar to ask about the vehicle registration renewal. Her second message was warmer. She said she hoped they could find something workable, said she didn't want this to be harder than it had to be. He had listened to both messages once. Neither changed anything about the sequence. She thought she had the room. She thought she was inside a process she already understood. That was exactly where Patricia needed her. Isaiah arrived at the offices of Hargrove and Pierce on the 9th floor of the building on Peachtree Street 19 minutes early. He liked it that way. He was back at the table now, the phone face up between him and Hargrove, the first file open on the screen, turned so Hargrove could see it clearly. The first file was the Clarity Financial Services Business Registry entry. Name of entity. Date of incorporation. Member name. Address of registered business. The Calloway home address. The same address as the renovation Isaiah had spent 3 weekends completing so that Denise would have a proper space to work. Hargrove looked at the screen. He looked at Isaiah. Isaiah said nothing. He took the phone back, scrolled, and placed the second file in front of Hargrove. The revenue documentation, Claudette's client list, cross-referenced with Darnell's forensic trace, 22 months. $341,000 billed through an entity Hargrove had not been told existed. The room was very quiet. Patricia had not said anything. She was sitting with her hands folded on the table and the particular expression of an attorney who has been waiting for a proceeding to arrive at the place where it was always going to arrive. Hargrove looked at the second document. He set it down. He picked it up again. He looked at the billing total. He set it down again. He looked at Denise. Denise was looking at the phone. Something moved across her expression. She had been composed when she walked in, had maintained it through Hargrove's opening, had been sitting with the posture of a woman inside a room she believed she controlled. That posture was different now. It didn't collapse, it recalibrated, which was more specific and more revealing than a collapse. The expression of someone rapidly revising a set of assumptions they had held for months, in real time, in a room that was not built for that kind of revision. Isaiah took the phone back. He opened the third file. The credit line documentation. The joint application. Her signature as co-applicant. The 3 transfer records totaling $41,000 from the business credit line into the Clarity Financial operating account. The credit line was for a commercial renovation project, Patricia said, her voice entirely level. It was applied for jointly. 3 transfers from that line, totaling $41,000, moved into an entity that was not disclosed as part of the marital estate. She let that sit for a moment. We are prepared to demonstrate that this constitutes both undisclosed marital income and misappropriation of jointly obtained credit. Hargrove put the third document down. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at Denise with the expression of an attorney who has received new material facts about his client's situation and is performing a rapid recalculation of every position he had just stated with confidence. Denise was not looking at him. She was looking at Isaiah's phone on the table. The silence lasted 9 seconds. Isaiah counted them. Then Hargrove said, "I think we should take a recess." Isaiah stood. He buttoned his jacket. He picked up the phone from the table and put it back in his left breast pocket, where it had always been and where it would always be. He shook Patricia's hand. He walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned to Hargrove first, not to Denise, to the attorney who had delivered the sentence, and said it the way you say a simple, true thing that requires no performance. "You had the inventory," Isaiah said. "You just didn't have the whole warehouse." He walked out without looking back. It did not happen all at once. Clarity Financial Services was dissolved the month after the dissolution was filed, once its existence was on the record and the tax implications became a matter Denise needed to address with her own accountant. The $341,000 in undisclosed income was characterized in the settlement as marital income that had been concealed, which materially altered the asset calculation. The $41,000 credit line diversion was addressed as a separate instrument. The settlement took 5 months to finalize. What Denise received was accurately calculated from what had actually been shared between them. 6 years of genuinely joint assets, correctly valued, correctly divided. It was not nothing. It was considerably less than what Hargrove had walked into the first meeting expecting to negotiate. She was carrying the weight of what she had built in the basement and the weight of what it cost her when it came to light. Not dramatically, just constantly. Isaiah was building. He had always been building. The renovation contracts on weekends had been growing for 3 years. Quiet, referred, the kind of work that came from people who had seen a finished job and called the number on the van. By the spring after the settlement, he had 2 crews instead of 1. He had hired a project coordinator named Jamal, who had been a foreman at a general contractor and who ran a job site the way Isaiah ran a route. Clean sequence. Documented, no gaps. He answered every call the same day. He gave accurate timelines and hit them. 14 months after the first meeting on the 9th floor, Isaiah stood in the kitchen of a renovation he was finishing in Buckhead, a full gut of a 1940s bungalow, down to the studs, rebuilt with the care of someone who understood that the bones of a structure were either right or they weren't. And it was better to know before you closed the walls. He was checking the cabinet alignment with a level, the way he always checked it, not trusting the eye alone, trusting the instrument. It was right. He set the level on the counter. He took the phone out of his left breast pocket. He checked the time. He had a call at 3 with a new client. He had a materials delivery at the Decatur project at 4:30 that Jamal was managing but that Isaiah wanted to confirm. He made both notes on the phone, he put it back in his pocket and went back to work. On a Friday evening in late October, Isaiah was on the back porch of the house. His house now, unambiguously, the one in his name, the finished basement still there, but quiet now, the separate entrance he'd built no longer used for anything except storing materials for weekend projects. He sat with a glass of water and listened to the neighborhood settle into evening. A dog, 2 houses down, a car on the street. The oak tree in the backyard that he had been meaning to have the dead branch taken off and hadn't gotten to yet. He looked at the house from the outside, at the deck he had built, at the window of the basement room, dark now, the second monitor gone. He thought about the man who had sat in a warehouse parking lot at 5:45 in the morning and decided to treat the whole thing like a root failure. He finished the water. He went inside. He turned out the light. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.